Please, I'll give you anything you want. Just spare my people." King Primus sobbed, his cries of anguish filling the cold metal chamber of the human flagship. He knelt before the impassive Admiral Johnny Shaw, broken and utterly defeated. The once proud ruler of the Illyrian race was now reduced to a pitiful wretch, his resplendent robes torn and stained with the blood of his fallen warriors. Admiral Shaw regarded the groveling king with icy contempt, a triumphant gleam in his steely eyes. For years, the Illyrians had waged a brutal guerrilla war against humanity's galactic empire, sabotaging key installations and assassinating high-ranking officials. But now their resistance had been crushed, their fleets shattered, and their homeworld occupied by human forces. "You dare beg for mercy?" Admiral Shaw sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "After all the lives you've taken, all the destruction you've wrought, your people brought this upon themselves, Primus. You should have known better than to challenge humanity's rightful dominion over the galaxy." Primus trembled as he recalled the early days of the Illyrian insurgency, when a shadowy figure known as Ghost had rallied his people to fight against human oppression. At first, their daring raids and sabotage missions had given them hope, striking fear into the hearts of human colonists and corporate overlords alike. But it had all been for naught. Humanity's response was swift and merciless, their advanced warships and battle-hardened marines crushing the Illyrian resistance with ruthless efficiency. Now, as Primus knelt before the conquering admiral, he knew that the very survival of his species hung in the balance. The grizzled Colonel Deckard Briggs, Shaw's second-in-command, stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. "What shall we do with him, sir?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Execute him as an example to the rest of these alien scum?" Admiral Shaw considered for a moment, his gaze boring into Primus's pleading eyes. The fate of an entire species rested on his next words, and the desperate king could only pray that some shred of mercy still existed within the human's cold, unyielding heart. The echoes of Admiral Shaw's demand for unconditional surrender hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of smoke and the coppery scent of spilled blood. King Primus, his shoulders slumped in defeat, could only nod his assent, the weight of his decision pressing down upon him like a physical burden. As he stared at the cold metal floor, his mind drifted back to 5 years earlier, when the Illyrian resistance had been little more than a scattered collection of rebels and malcontents. It had been a time of desperation, of secret meetings in dimly lit rooms, and whispered plans of defiance. He thought of Captain Zara Solaris, the human operative who had raided the weapons facility, where Keelan, the brilliant Illyrian scientist, had been working on a new weapon for the resistance. Primus had never met Keelan, but he had heard whispers of her genius, her fierce tenacity to protect their people at any cost. And then there was Ravax Thorn, the charismatic insurgent leader who had united the rebel cells under his command. Primus remembered the first time he had seen Ravax speak, his words igniting a fire in the hearts of the Illyrian people, giving them hope in their darkest hour. But that hope had been short-lived. As the sabotage missions escalated, the human corporations that controlled Earth's galactic empire had grown increasingly concerned. They had pressured the military to take decisive action, and Admiral Shaw had been all too eager to oblige. Primus had tried to navigate the treacherous political landscape, torn between his desire to protect his people and his pride as a ruler. But in the end, it had all been for nothing. The human war machine had been too powerful, too relentless. And now, as he knelt before Admiral Shaw, he knew that the fate of his people rested in his hands. He could only pray that by surrendering, he might save them from annihilation. "Very well," Admiral Shaw said, his voice cold and impassive. "Your surrender is accepted, King Primus, but make no mistake, your people will pay for their insolence." Primus felt a shudder run through his body at the Admiral's words. He knew that the humans would not be satisfied with mere surrender. They would demand more, much more. As if reading his thoughts, Colonel Briggs stepped forward, his hand still resting on his sidearm. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you will provide us with the location of all remaining Illyrian weapons caches and rebel strongholds. You will also turn over any and all scientists and engineers who have been working on advanced technologies for the resistance." Primus's heart sank at the colonel's words. He knew that Keelan would be among those scientists, and that by turning her over to the humans, he would be condemning her to a fate worse than death. But what choice did he have? The survival of his people depended on his cooperation, no matter how much it sickened him. With a heavy heart, Primus nodded his assent once more. "It shall be done," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. As the human soldiers led him away, Primus could only hope that someday, somehow, his people would find a way to rise again, and that the sacrifices he had made would not be in vain. As news of King Primus's surrender spread through the Illyrian resistance, a ripple of shock and disbelief coursed through their ranks. In a hidden bunker deep beneath the surface of their homeworld, Ravax Thorn paced restlessly, his fists clenched at his sides. "This changes nothing," he growled, addressing the small group of his most loyal followers. "We will not bow to these human oppressors. Our fight continues." Ravax's eyes blazed with fierce purpose as he outlined his plan. They would go underground, deeper than ever before, and wage a guerrilla war that would make the humans rue the day they set foot on Illyrian soil. Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, Captain Zara Solaris stood before Admiral Shaw, her posture rigid and her expression neutral. "Sir, I request permission to lead the hunt for the remaining insurgents." Shaw nodded curtly. "Granted, Captain. Your first priority is to extract information from the captured Illyrian scientist, Keelan. We need to know what Ravax is planning." In the depths of the ship's holding cells, Zara faced Keelan across a stark metal table. The Illyrian scientist's silvery skin was dull with fatigue, her luminous eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I won't betray my people," Keelan said, her voice barely above a whisper. Zara leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Your people have already surrendered, Keelan. Working with us now is the best way to ensure their survival." Hours passed as Zara skillfully navigated the interrogation, building a rapport with Keelan. Gradually, the Illyrian's dedication began to crumble. There's something Ravax has been searching for," Keelan finally admitted, her voice trembling. "An ancient artifact called the Orb of Dominion. He believes it holds the power to turn the tide of the war." Zara's eyes widened at the revelation. If such a weapon fell into Ravax's hands, it could spell disaster for the human forces. She immediately assembled a special task force, including her trusted lieutenant, Sergeant Max Riker. As Zara briefed her team, tension crackled in the air. "Our mission is clear," she stated. "We must locate the orb before Ravax does, no matter the consequences." Unbeknownst to Zara, Colonel Briggs lurked in the shadows, his face twisted with disdain. He saw her measured approach as weakness, a sentiment shared by several other high-ranking officers. As Zara's team departed, Briggs began to formulate a plan to undermine her mission and push for total Illyrian subjugation. Light years away, on a remote, mist-shrouded planet, Ravax Thorn and a small group of his most elite warriors approached an ancient temple. Its weathered stone facade was etched with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As they entered the temple's cavernous interior, a figure materialized before them, an Illyrian priestess with eyes that glowed like twin moons. She regarded Ravax with an unnerving intensity. "I am Liara," she intoned, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I have awaited one worthy to claim the Orb of Dominion. Are you he, Ravax Thorn?" Ravax stepped forward, his chin raised in defiance. "I am, and with its power, I will drive the humans from our world and restore our people to greatness." Liara's eyes narrowed as she probed Ravax's mind, sensing the roiling darkness within him. "The trials ahead will test not just your strength, but your very soul," she warned. "Are you prepared for what lies ahead?" Before Ravax could respond, the temple walls began to tremble. Outside, the whine of approaching engines shattered the planet's eerie silence. Captain Zara Solaris and her team had arrived, ready to claim the orb for themselves. The race for the artifact that could change the course of the war had begun in earnest, with the fate of both humans and Illyrians hanging in the balance. The ancient temple trembled as Captain Zara Solaris and her team breached its entrance. Dust and debris rained down from the crumbling ceiling as they advanced, weapons at the ready. The air crackled with tension and the acrid smell of ozone. Ravak's thorns spun to face the intruders, his eyes blazing with fierce drive. "You're too late, humans," he snarled, holding aloft a pulsing orb that bathed the chamber in an eerie, otherworldly light. Before Zara could respond, Ravak activated the Orb of Dominion. A blinding flash erupted from the artifact, and a wave of energy surged outward, knocking the human soldiers off their feet. Outside the temple, the sky ignited with brilliant flares as Ravak's forces launched a full-scale assault on the human invasion fleet. Massive Illyrian warships, powered by the orb's energy, tore through the human defenses like paper. Aboard the flagship, Admiral Shaw's face contorted with shock and rage as he watched his fleet disintegrate before his eyes. "All ships, fall back," he barked into the comms. "Initiate tactical retreat." But Colonel Briggs, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light, refused to yield. "Belay that order," he shouted, shoving aside the communications officer. "We end this now. Deploy the purifier." On the planet's surface, Zara struggled to her feet, her ears ringing from the orb's detonation. Through the haze, she saw Ravak's collapse, the effort of wielding the artifact's power having taken its toll. The priestess Liara knelt beside him, her luminous eyes fixed on Zara. "You must see," Liara whispered, reaching out to touch Zara's temple. In an instant, Zara's mind was flooded with images, ancient star maps, DNA strands intertwining, and a race of beings that looked both human and Illyrian. Zara gasped as the vision faded. We're the same," she breathed, her world tilting on its axis. A distant rumble drew her attention skyward. Through the temple's crumbling roof, she saw a sickly green mist descending from the clouds. The purifier. Panic gripped Zara as she watched the bioweapon tear through the Illyrian forces. But her horror multiplied as she saw the green tendrils begin to coil around human ships as well. Aboard Briggs's command ship, Sergeant Max Riker fought his way through panicked crew members. He burst onto the bridge, his rifle trained on the rogue colonel. "Stand down, Briggs," he shouted. "You've doomed us all." Briggs sneered, reaching for his sidearm. In the ensuing struggle, Max's shot went wide, striking the purifier's control panel. Alarms blared as the ship's AI announced, "Containment breach. Purifier released on all decks." Back in the temple, Ravak stirred, his eyes widening as he saw the destruction unfolding above. He turned to Liara, his face etched with anguish. "What have I done?" Liara placed her hand on the orb, her eyes glowing with an inner fire. "You can still make this right," she said softly. Ravak nodded, grasping the artifact. With a cry of pain, he channeled its power outward, creating a shimmering dome that spread across the sky. The purifier's advance halted, trapped within the containment field. But as the field solidified, Zara realized with horror that Ravak, Liara, and countless others, both human and Illyrian, were frozen in place, caught in a state of suspended animation. She stumbled backward, barely making it out of the field's radius before it closed completely. In the eerie silence that followed, Zara's comm crackled to life. It was Max, his voice strained. "Captain, I've secured the flagship, but it's bad. The purifier, the orb, we're in over our heads here." Zara's gaze swept over the devastation, the stasis field, the ravaged fleets, the scarred planet below. In the distance, she saw King Primus emerge from his bunker, his face a mask of shock and despair as he took in the catastrophic aftermath of his surrender. "Max," Zara said, her voice steady despite the weight settling on her shoulders. "Get to my coordinates. We need to find a way to reverse this, and I think the orb is our only shot." As she waited for Max, Zara's eyes locked with Primus's across the battlefield. In that moment, she knew they both faced the same impossible choice: find a way to harness the orb's power to save what remained of both species, or let pride and fear doom them all to extinction. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, with the key to their salvation trapped just out of reach. King Primus stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the shimmering containment field that held Ravak, Liara, and countless others in stasis. The weight of his choices pressed down upon him like a physical force. Captain Zara approached, her face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and dedication. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice low, "we need to act quickly. The purifier is still a threat, and we don't know how long that field will hold." Primus's teeth clenched. He knew what needed to be done, but the thought of using the very artifact that had brought such destruction to his people filled him with revulsion. Yet as he looked out over the devastated landscape, he realized his pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "You're right, Captain. Let us see what secrets this orb truly holds." Together they approached the edge of the containment field. Primus reached out, his fingers trembling as they made contact with the pulsing energy. In an instant, his mind was flooded with images, vast star systems, DNA strands intertwining, and beings that seemed both familiar and alien. As the visions unfolded, Primus gasped, "By the ancestors, we are one and the same." The revelation spread like wildfire through the gathered survivors. Humans and Illyrians alike stared at each other in shock and disbelief as the truth of their shared heritage became undeniable. Inside the containment field, Ravak stirred. His body was battered, but his mind was clear. He turned to Liara, whose luminous eyes held a depth of knowledge that both awed and humbled him. "The orb," he whispered. "It's more than just a weapon, isn't it?" Liara nodded, a sad smile playing on her lips. "It contains the wisdom of ages, Ravax, the power to heal, to restore, but it requires a worthy vessel." As they delved deeper into the orb's mysteries, tendrils of energy began to seep out from the containment field. Where they touched the scarred earth, life began to bloom anew. Outside the field, Zara's comm crackled to life. Max's voice came through, urgent and strained. "Captain, we've got a situation. Colonel Briggs has gone rogue. He's hijacked a ship loaded with purifier missiles, headed for the sanctuary world." Zara's blood ran cold. She locked eyes with Primus, seeing her own perseverance mirrored in his gaze. Without a word, they sprinted towards the nearest functional shuttle. As they raced through space, Zara at the helm and Primus monitoring communications, the sanctuary world came into view. So did Briggs's ship, a malevolent shape against the stars. "There!" Max shouted from the weapons station. "I've got a lock!" Their shuttle shuddered as Briggs opened fire. Zara's hands flew over the controls, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that left Primus clutching his seat. "We need to disable his ship without triggering those missiles," Zara called out. Max nodded grimly. "I'm on it." What followed was a deadly dance among the stars. Zara's piloting skills were pushed to their limits as she wove through Briggs's barrage of fire. Max returned fire with surgical precision, targeting the ship's engines and weapon systems. Finally, a well-placed shot from Max sent Briggs's ship spinning. Zara expertly maneuvered their shuttle alongside, and she and Max boarded the crippled vessel. They found Briggs in the cockpit, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. His eyes blazed with fanatical hatred as he spat at their feet. "You're too late," he snarled, his hand hovering over a console. "I've already activated the Armageddon protocol. Every purifier missile in our arsenal is now primed and ready to launch. In minutes, there won't be a habitable world left in this sector." Before they could react, Briggs slammed his hand down on the console. Alarms blared throughout the ship as the doomsday countdown began. Zara's mind raced. She knew the only hope of stopping this lay back on the planet's surface, with the orb and its mysterious guardians. She turned to Max, her expression grim. "Get him secured and get back to the shuttle. We need to return to the surface, now." As they hurtled back towards the planet, Zara could only hope they weren't already too late. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, and time was rapidly running out. The shuttle streaked through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of superheated plasma in its wake. Zara's fist clenched as she gripped the controls, willing the craft to move faster. Behind her, Max kept his weapon trained on the now restrained Briggs, whose eyes gleamed with a mixture of madness and triumph. As they approached the planet's surface, Zara's heart sank. The once lush landscape had been transformed into a hellscape of twisted metal and scorched earth. The containment field that had held Ravax and Liara flickered weakly, its edges fraying like a tattered banner. The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring thud. Zara and Max dragged Briggs from the craft, their eyes scanning the desolation for any sign of life. A figure emerged from the haze. King Primus, his regal bearing, at odds with the carnage surrounding him. "We're too late," Primus said, his voice hollow. "The Armageddon Protocol, it's begun." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The weakened containment field collapsed entirely, releasing a shockwave that knocked them all to the ground. As the dust settled, two familiar silhouettes appeared, Ravax and Liara, freed from their stasis. Ravax's eyes widened as he took in the devastation. "What have we done?" he whispered. Liara placed a hand on his shoulder, her luminous gaze sweeping across the assembled group. "The time for recrimination is past," she said. "We must act now if there is to be any hope of survival." In the days that followed, the survivors gathered in an abandoned outpost on the outskirts of what had once been a thriving metropolis. The air was thick with tension as humans and Illyrians eyed each other warily across makeshift conference tables. Zara pored over star charts, her face etched with exhaustion. "We've lost contact with over half our colonies," she reported grimly. "The ones we can reach, the reports are catastrophic." Primus nodded, his own datapad displaying equally grim statistics. "My people fare no better. Entire worlds have gone dark." As they debated their next moves, a commotion erupted outside the command center. Zara and Primus rushed out to find a group of human soldiers confronting a contingent of Illyrian warriors. Weapons were drawn, fingers hovering over triggers. "Stand down!" Zara barked, inserting herself between the two groups. "We can't afford this now." Primus addressed his people, his voice carrying the weight of command. "She speaks truth. Our very survival depends on cooperation." Slowly, reluctantly, weapons were lowered. But the mistrust remained, a palpable force threatening to ignite at any moment. As night fell, Primus prepared to depart. "I must search for more of my people," he said. "There may be survivors in the outer colonies." Zara nodded. "Go, we'll continue our efforts here." As Primus's ship vanished into the star-studded sky, Zara couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something was brewing, a storm on the horizon that threatened to shatter their fragile alliance. Unbeknownst to them, in a hidden base light years away, Colonel Briggs sat before a bank of monitors. His escape had been meticulously planned, his loyalists strategically placed. On the screens before him, images flickered, starships being retrofitted, weapons stockpiles growing. "Soon," he murmured, a cold smile playing across his lips. "Soon we'll finish what we started." In another sector of space, aboard a commandeered Illyrian cruiser, a figure stood silhouetted against the viewport. Varya, cousin to the fallen priestess Liara, watched as her followers prepared for war. "The humans think us beaten," she hissed. "They will learn the true might of the Illyrian Empire." As Varya turned from the viewport, a communication alert chimed. The message was brief, encrypted, but its implications were clear. A human faction, led by one Colonel Briggs, sought an alliance. Varya's eyes narrowed. Perhaps this human could be of use, for now. Back on the ravaged planet, Zara jolted awake, her dreams plagued by visions of renewed conflict. She made her way to the command center, finding Max already there, poring over intelligence reports. "Anything?" she asked. Max shook his head. "Nothing concrete, but something's not right. I can feel it." Zara nodded, her gaze drawn to the star-filled sky visible through the cracked dome above. Out there, somewhere, forces were aligning against them. The war, it seemed, was far from finished. The uneasy calm shattered like glass. Alarms blared through the command center as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Zara's comm unit lit up with urgent messages, each more dire than the last. "Captain, we've got multiple purifier strikes in the Epsilon sector." Max's voice crackled through the chaos. "Illyrian leadership is reporting similar attacks. It's a coordinated offensive." Zara's mind focused as she absorbed the information. The fragile peace they'd fought so hard to achieve was crumbling before her eyes. She turned to her assembled team, their faces a mixture of willpower and fear. "Briggs!" She spat the name like a curse. "He's made his move. We need to end this now." Within hours, Zara's strike team was en route to a derelict military complex on the fringes of human space. Intelligence suggested it housed Briggs's main bioweapon stockpile. As their shuttle approached, Max outlined the plan of attack. "We'll split into 3 teams," he said, gesturing to a holographic map. "Alpha team takes the north entrance, Beta the east. Gamma provides cover and handles any surprises." The complex loomed before them, a maze of rusted metal and shadowed corridors. As they touched down, the air itself seemed to crackle with tension. Zara raised her hand, signaling the advance. The first shots rang out before they'd even breached the perimeter. Separatist forces erupted from hidden bunkers, their weapons spitting death. Zara dove for cover, the acrid smell of weapons fire filling her nostrils. "Max, we need an opening," she shouted over the comm. "On it, Captain." A series of explosions rocked the compound as Max's team detonated their charges. In the confusion, Zara's squad surged forward, pushing deeper into the facility. Elsewhere in the galaxy, King Primus's diplomatic envoy barely escaped with their lives. The Illyrian monarch stared at the burning wreckage of what should have been a peaceful meeting, his heart heavy with the weight of failure. "Your Majesty," one of his guards approached, voice low. "We've identified the attackers. They bear the mark of Varya's zealots." Primus closed his eyes, a wave of weariness washing over him. When he opened them again, they blazed with renewed purpose. He turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to Ravax," he ordered. Tell him I request his aid." The response came swifter than Primus had dared hope. Ravax, the enigmatic rebel leader, agreed to join forces against Varya's extremists. Within days, they had formulated a plan to capture the rogue priestess herself. The operation went smoothly at first. Ravax's intelligence proved impeccable, leading them straight to Varya's hidden sanctuary. But as they closed in, the air around them seemed to warp and twist. Varya stood at the center of the chaos, her eyes glowing with otherworldly power. With a gesture, she sent Ravax flying across the room. He slammed into a wall with a sickening crunch, blood trickling from his mouth as he slumped to the floor. "Fools!" Varya's voice resonated with unnatural force. "You cannot stop what is to come." It took the combined efforts of Primus's elite guard and Ravax's remaining forces to subdue her. As they secured her unconscious form, Primus knelt beside the gravely injured Ravax. "Hold on, old friend," he murmured. "We need you yet." The galaxy teetered on the brink of annihilation. With both their factions reeling from the Radicals' assault, Zara and Primus realized they had no choice but to combine their strengths. A joint task force was hastily assembled. Human tactical prowess melded with Illyrian psychic abilities as they prepared for a final, desperate push against Briggs's fortress. The battle that followed would be etched in the annals of both species for generations to come. Briggs's forces fought with the fervor of true believers, unleashing nightmarish bioweapon traps at every turn. Zara watched in horror as soldiers on both sides fell, their bodies twisting and dissolving under the purifier's influence. She pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything. At last, they breached the heart of the complex. There, in a room humming with hardly restrained energy, stood Colonel Briggs. His eyes gleamed with madness as he faced his former subordinate. "Max," he sneered, "come to join the winning side at last?" Max's reply came in the form of a lethal burst of fire. Briggs dodged, returning fire with terrifying accuracy. The two men clashed in a brutal dance of violence, each knowing that only one would walk away. In the end, it came down to a fraction of a second. As Briggs lunged for the final detonation switch, Max's shot found its mark. The colonel crumpled, his finger mere inches from dooming them all. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara surveyed the carnage, her heart heavy with the cost of their victory. But there was no time to mourn. A transmission from Primus cut through the stillness. "Captain," the Illyrian king's voice was grim. "We've subdued Varya, but Ravax, he's in critical condition, and he brings dire news." As Primus relayed Ravax's warning about the orb's resurrection, Zara felt a chill run down her spine. They had won the battle, but the war was not nearly finished. The true test of their newfound alliance lay ahead, shrouded in the mysteries of an ancient power neither fully understood nor controlled. Zara's mind raced as she processed Primus's grim transmission. Ravax's warning about the orb's resurrection sent a chill through her battle-weary body. She turned to her team, their faces etched with exhaustion and uncertainty. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of their situation. "Varya's still out there, and she's got plans for that orb. We need to move." Within hours, Zara and Primus had assembled a coalition of their most trusted operatives. Human Marines stood shoulder to shoulder with Illyrian commandos, united by a common threat. As they prepared for departure, Max approached Zara, his expression tense. "Captain, we've got intel from the captured zealots," he reported. "Varya's headed to some kind of sanctuary world. Ancient ruins supposedly able to amplify the orb's power." Zara nodded, her heart made. "Then that's where we're going. Primus, can your people pinpoint this sanctuary?" The Illyrian king's hologram flickered. "We have suspicions. It's a world long hidden from outsiders. But these are desperate times." Their strike force descended on the sanctuary world with surgical precision. As they breached the atmosphere, Zara's breath caught in her throat. Below them sprawled a landscape of impossible beauty, crystalline spires and ethereal gardens that defied earthly logic. But there was no time for wonder. Varya's followers had already begun their ritual, dark energies pulsing from the heart of an ancient temple complex. Zara's team hit the ground running, weapons at the ready. The air crackled with psychic energy as Illyrian commandos engaged Varya's zealots. Human Marines provided covering fire, their advanced weaponry tearing through the fanatics' defenses. Zara and Primus fought side by side, pushing ever closer to the temple's core. They were too late. A blinding flash erupted from the temple's pinnacle. Varya stood atop it, her form wreathed in crackling energy. Her eyes blazed with triumph as she raised the orb high. "Behold the true power of our people," she cried, her voice echoing unnaturally. The ground beneath them lurched. Fissures split the earth, swallowing entire sections of the battlefield. Zara grabbed Primus, dragging him toward their waiting shuttle. "Fall back," she screamed into her comm. "Everyone, get to the evac point now." As they clawed their way to safety, the very planet seemed to tear itself apart. The shuttle rocketed into orbit just as a massive energy pulse obliterated the surface below. Zara watched in horror as the sanctuary world crumbled, taking countless lives with it. "She's done it," Primus whispered, his regal composure shaken. "Varya has awakened the orb." With Varya's forces in hot pursuit, they sought refuge on a desolate human colony. Once a thriving outpost, it now stood as a silent monument to the devastation of their conflict. As they picked their way through abandoned streets, a gruff voice called out, "Well, well, didn't expect to see the big shots slumming it out here." A figure emerged from the shadows, a weathered human with a cybernetic eye and a patchwork of old military gear. He introduced himself as Zed, a scavenger eking out an existence in the ruins. Zara's instincts bristled, but something in Zed's demeanor spoke of hard-earned wisdom. "We're looking for a place to regroup," she said cautiously. "Any chance you could—" "Help you?" Zed chuckled darkly. "Oh, I might be able to do more than that. You folks ever hear of a little operation called Omega?" As Zed laid out his intel, Zara felt the ground shift beneath her feet once more. Colonel Briggs, the man they'd thought defeated, was alive, and he was after weapons that made even the orb pale in comparison. "Reality-shattering," Zed emphasized, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on their stunned faces. "The kind of thing that could rewrite the universe itself." Zara exchanged a look with Primus. They both knew. This changed everything. "Where?" Zara demanded. Zed grinned, revealing a mouthful of metallic teeth. "Oh, Captain, you're going to love this. Ever heard of Station Omega?" Within hours, their ragtag group was en route to the abandoned research facility. As they approached, the station's jagged silhouette loomed against the starfield, a monument to humanity's darkest ambitions. Zara steeled herself. Whatever horrors awaited them inside, whatever cosmic forces Briggs sought to control, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: they could not fail. The fate of reality itself hung in the balance. The station's interior was a labyrinth of twisted metal and flickering emergency lights. Zara led her team through the eerie corridors, every sense on high alert. They had barely begun their search when a deafening explosion rocked the structure. Alarms blared as the station shuddered. Zara's comm crackled to life with Max's urgent voice. "Captain, Briggs just detonated something in the central hub. The whole place is coming apart." Zara cursed, her mind racing. "Everyone, converge on the hub! We can't let him escape with those weapons!" They sprinted through disintegrating hallways, dodging debris and pockets of escaping atmosphere. As they neared the hub, a blinding flash of energy erupted from the central chamber. The team burst through the doors to find Colonel Briggs standing before a pulsing vortex of impossible geometries. In his hands, he clutched a device that crackled with reality-warping power. "You're too late," Briggs sneered, his eyes wild with triumph. "The universe is about to be rewritten." Zara raised her weapon, but before she could fire, Briggs activated the device. The world around them seemed to stretch and tear, colors inverting as the fabric of reality itself began to unravel. In that moment of cosmic chaos, Zara made a desperate lunge for the device. Her fingers closed around it just as another surge of energy exploded outward. The last thing she saw was her team being blasted apart by the shockwave before everything went white. When consciousness returned, Zara found herself adrift in an escape pod, the cold of space pressing in around her. Her head throbbed as she tried to piece together what had happened. The devices, were clutched tightly to her chest. Multiple prototypes of the reality-shredding technology Briggs had sought. Through the pod's small viewport, Zara saw only unfamiliar stars. Station Omega was gone, along with any sign of her team or their ships. The universe itself seemed subtly altered, as if viewed through a distorting lens. A weak signal pierced the silence. "Anyone, copy? This is Zed. Survivors, respond." Zara fumbled for the communications panel. "Zed? It's Zara. What's your status?" Static crackled before Zed's gruff voice came through clearer. "Captain, thank the void. I'm planetside on some backwater colony, gathering who I can find. It's bad out here." "How bad?" "Reality's coming apart at the seams. Briggs and Varya's people are scattered, but they're regrouping. And there's something else." Zed's voice lowered. "Something's spreading through systems like a cancer, eating away at the fabric of space itself." Zara's blood ran cold. What had they unleashed? "Listen," Zed continued. "I've got a lead on some allies, people committed to fixing this mess. Can you make it to these coordinates?" As Zed relayed the location, Zara's mind raced. With these prototypes in the right team, they might have a chance to undo the damage, to save what was left of their universe. She punched the coordinates into the pod's navigation system. "I'm on my way, Zed. We're going to need all the help we can get." The escape pod's engines flared to life, propelling Zara into the unknown. As stars streaked past, she clutched the devices close. Whatever cosmic horrors awaited, whatever it took to set things right, she knew one thing with certainty. The real battle was just beginning. Zara's escape pod hurtled through the unfamiliar stars, the prototype devices clutched tightly to her chest. As she neared the coordinates Zed had provided, a crackling transmission cut through the silence. "Captain, do you read?" Ravak's voice, strained and distant, filtered through the pod's speakers. "Ravax, how—" "No time," he interjected. "I'm guiding you from the quantum void. We need to construct an entropic harmonizer. It's our only hope against what's coming." Before Zara could respond, the pod shuddered violently. Through the viewport, she saw reality itself seeming to warp and tear. The coordinates Zed had given her materialized into view, an abandoned Illyrian science outpost. As the pod touched down, Zara spotted Max and a group of fighters engaged in a fierce firefight with Varya's zealots. She sprinted from the pod, ducking energy blasts as she made her way to cover. "Max!" she called out. "What's the situation?" Max's face was grim as he returned fire. "They're after the facility's tech. We can't let them—" His words were cut short by an agonized scream. Zara watched in horror as Shara, the Illyrian warrior who had become a vital part of their team, crumpled to the ground. A zealot assassin stood over her, a nightmarish biogenic weapon pulsing in its hands. The air around them suddenly distorted, rippling with cosmic energy. Zara felt a surge of raw power emanating from somewhere beyond normal space. Ravax's disembodied consciousness, driven by grief and rage, tore at the very fabric of reality. "Move!" Zara shouted, seizing the momentary advantage. They pushed forward, fighting their way into the facility's depths. As they entered the megastructure housing the harmonizer schematics, the universe itself seemed to retaliate. Psychically charged storms of entropic energy bombarded them, twisting physics in ways that defied comprehension. Zed, his cybernetic eye whirring frantically, called out, "I can see the patterns, but not for long. Hurry!" Zara and Max raced to retrieve the schematics as Zed provided cover. But the entity's assault intensified, focusing its metaphysical might on the veteran scavenger. Zed's body convulsed as the cosmic forces overwhelmed his augmented senses. With their team decimated, Zara made a bold strategy. She activated one of the prototype devices, tearing open a subspace rift. "Everyone through!" she commanded. As the surviving members of their group stumbled through the portal, Zara turned back. Max lay on the ground, critically wounded. She lunged for him just as the rift began to collapse. The world around them imploded, and everything went dark. Zara awoke to an alien landscape, a barren, blasted world devoid of life. Beside her, Max groaned, his injuries still severe, but no longer immediately life-threatening. "Where are we?" he rasped. Zara surveyed their surroundings. "I don't know, but look, those ruins. They're familiar somehow." As they explored the desolate wasteland, a chilling realization dawned. This forgotten outpost bore the unmistakable signs of both human and Illyrian influence. Ancient technology, corroded by eons, hinted at a civilization that had once stood on the brink of greatness. "They were here before us," Zara murmured, piecing together the fragments of a cosmic cycle. "Our ancestors. They face the same threat we do now." Max's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. The entity, it's not just some random force. It's a response to our evolution, a failsafe gone wrong. Zara nodded grimly. "And now we have to stop it. We're so close to completing the harmonizer. We just need those last Terran components." She turned to face Max, her expression resolute. "I have a plan, but it's going to put everything at risk." As Zara outlined her desperate strategy, Max began the painstaking work of assembling the harmonizer from the pieces they'd gathered. The fate of reality itself hung in the balance, with only their small team standing between existence and oblivion.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.